The sky was a heavy shade of gray, that morning clouds thick with unshed rain, pressing down on the mourners gathered around the wooden casket. A somber wind rolled through the cemetery, scattering leaves like memories across the grass. As the preacher began his eulogy, the unmistakable sound of nails on concrete echoed down the hill. Heads turned. What they saw next would leave every person in tears. A large, aging German shepherd slowly limped through the cemetery gate, his fur graying, his steps unsteady but determined. No one recognized him until he made his way directly to the casket, sat down beside it, and refused to move. Not for anything. Not for anyone. The service stopped. Silence fell. And in that moment, everyone knew this dog wasn't just here by chance. He was here to say goodbye. Before we dive into this unforgettable true story of love, loyalty, and the bond that even death couldn't sever, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to Positive Tales. If you believe in kindness, second chances, or the unwavering loyalty of animals, let your heart be seen. This story deserves to be shared. The man in the casket was Officer Michael Harrington, 52 years old, a veteran of the local police department. He'd served for over 25 years, most of them on the K-9 unit. He was the kind of officer people remembered, not because he was loud or flashy, but because he was steady. Dependable. The kind of guy who showed up when things got bad and stayed until they were better. He didn't talk much about his personal life, but he often spoke of his partner Ranger, the German shepherd who had ridden shotgun with him for nearly a decade. The two had been inseparable on the force, credited with dozens of successful drug busts, rescues, and one especially famous case where Ranger tracked a missing toddler for miles through the woods and found her just before nightfall. They were local heroes. Until the day Ranger was retired. When Ranger aged out of service, policy dictated that he be placed in a retirement home or adopted by a suitable family. Michael fought to keep him, but his small apartment and busy schedule raised concerns. Regulations couldn't be bent, not even for him. Ranger was relocated to a farm outside of town, safe, yes, but far from the man he saw as his world. It broke Michael. Those closest to him noticed the shift. He became quieter. Slower. He still showed up, still did his job, but his smile came less easily. He visited Ranger when he could, and every time he left, the old shepherd tried to follow him, whimpering at the gate. Ranger never forgot. Not even once. Years passed. Michael developed heart issues, something he rarely spoke about. One day, he simply didn't show up for work. By the time a neighbor checked in, it was too late. The town mourned. Officers wore black bands on their badges. Flags flew at half-mast. But no one thought to tell Ranger. No one knew how. But love has a way of knowing. On the morning of the funeral, Ranger escaped the farm. No one saw how he got out. The gate was still latched. There were no holes in the fence. But by mid-morning, the old dog was gone. A local gas station security camera caught a glimpse of him trotting down Main Street, tail low, head forward, as if pulled by something unseen. He crossed 4 miles of town, wandered past traffic, parks, and alleys, until he reached Oakwood Cemetery. How he knew the location, no one could explain. But he arrived just before the final prayer. When he reached the casket, Ranger let out a sound, half whimper, half sigh, and gently laid his head against the wood. The crowd froze. Some gasped. Some cried openly. Officer Jenna Morales, who had once trained under Michael, knelt beside him, trying to coax Ranger away. He didn't budge. He didn't even blink. For the rest of the service, he stayed right there, guarding the casket like he'd guarded his partner for so many years. The pastor, moved beyond words, adjusted his eulogy. He spoke not just of duty and honor, but of love, and of a loyalty too pure for words. When the casket was lowered into the ground, Ranger stood. He watched every movement, ears alert, tail still. When the final rose was placed on the grave, he stepped forward, placed one paw on the dirt, and let out a soft bark, just once, as if to say goodbye. That should have been the end. But it wasn't. Ranger refused to leave. The officers tried to lead him away. So did the funeral staff. Even the farm owner who had raised him for years came to collect him. Ranger wouldn't go. He stayed by that grave, through the rain, through the cold, for 2 straight nights. The cemetery staff brought him blankets and food. Strangers who heard the story on social media came to sit with him, to bring him treats, to thank him. But Ranger barely ate. He was waiting. Watching. Mourning. By the 3rd day, Jenna returned, not in uniform, but in jeans and a hoodie. She sat beside Ranger in the grass, watching the early morning mist curl through the trees. She stayed there for hours. Finally, she stood up and whispered something to him. Ranger looked up. And slowly, very slowly, he followed her to her car. Jenna had made a decision. Michael was gone, but his legacy didn't have to be. Ranger needed a home. Not a farm. A family. She adopted him that day. It wasn't easy. Ranger grieved. He would sometimes sit by the door for hours, waiting for someone who'd never return. But Jenna was patient. She brought him to the precinct once a week, where officers greeted him like an old friend. Kids at the local school called him Hero Dog. Bit by bit, Ranger healed. His eyes, once dim with sadness, began to shine again. One spring morning, Jenna took Ranger to visit Michael's grave. As they approached, Ranger broke into a slow trot, tail wagging gently. He sat by the tombstone and let out a low, familiar bark. Jenna stood beside him, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "He knows, buddy. He knows you came back." They visited every month after that. Ranger always brought something, a stick, a leaf, once even an old tennis ball he'd found. Jenna believed it was his way of honoring Michael, of showing he remembered. And she believed, with all her heart, that Michael was watching. Proud. Grateful. A year later, Ranger passed peacefully in his sleep, curled up at the foot of Jenna's bed. His ashes were buried next to Michael's, by special permission of the department. The town held another small ceremony. Officers saluted. Children brought flowers. And on the grave marker, below Michael's name, a new line was etched. And beside him, his partner. Forever faithful. Forever home. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like, share, and subscribe to Positive Tales. These stories remind us of the love that animals give freely, the bonds that never break, and the beauty of second chances. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. Special request before we go, in the comments below, tell us about an animal that changed your life. We'd love to hear your story.